owning a farm in a neighborhood that barely tolerated lawn gnomes? Yeah, I knew from day one that I was in for a fight. But never in my wildest dreams did I imagine I'd be dealing with an HOA busybody, let's call her Brenda, calling 911 on my property. Let alone that she'd end up being the one they came for. It all started when I inherited my grandfather's land, a sprawling 15-million-acre farm just outside the city limits. It had been in my family for generations, a quiet sanctuary where we grew produce, raised livestock, and lived peacefully. The farm sat right on the edge of a cookie-cutter residential neighborhood, and while the HOA had absolutely no jurisdiction over my land, that didn't stop Brenda from trying to rule over it with an iron fist. Anyway, Brenda, the self-proclaimed president for life of the HOA, had been a real thorn in my side ever since I moved in. She didn't like that my farm didn't fit her precious, approved suburban aesthetic. She hated that I had a vibrant red barn instead of some beige McMansion. And most of all, she despised my animals. She tried everything to make my life miserable. She sent these nasty letters, practically demanding I remove my fences because they were an eyesore. She actually complained that the smell of hay and fresh soil was offensive. Can you believe that? She even went so far as to tell my farmhands they weren't allowed to park their trucks on my land. But the absolute worst came when she declared war on my beloved animals. It started with a ridiculous petition to ban livestock. Brenda, with the help of her little clique of HOA cronies, let's call one of them Gary, gathered signatures, demanding I remove my chickens, goats, and cattle. Her reasoning? Loud, unsanitary, and disruptive to the harmony of the neighborhood. Never mind that my property wasn't part of the HOA. Never mind that my family had been farming this land long before her precious neighborhood was even a twinkle in the developer's eye. I simply ignored her ludicrous demands, which, of course, only made her escalate. She filed these bogus noise complaints about my roosters, even though they were penned way out in the back, far from any houses. She called city inspectors, claiming I was violating zoning laws, which I absolutely was not. She even tried to have my fencing torn down, claiming it was blocking the neighborhood's view, even though there was no view to block. When none of that worked, she did what every entitled, power-hungry busybody does when they don't get their way: she called the cops. I was out on the barn, mending a fence, when I heard the wail of sirens in the distance. At first, I just figured it was a patrol car passing by. But then, 2 police cruisers pulled right into my driveway. My blood ran cold. I knew exactly who was behind it. I stepped outside, wiping my greasy hands on my jeans, as 2 officers climbed out of their cars. And there, standing behind them, arms crossed and looking smug as ever, was Brenda. "Can I help you, officers?" I asked, trying to keep the exasperation out of my voice. One of the officers, a tall, no-nonsense-looking guy, glanced down at his notepad. "We received a complaint about illegal livestock and zoning violations." I let out a frustrated breath. "Let me guess, Brenda?" Brenda huffed. "It's Mrs. Henderson to you." And yes, I reported it. This farm is a nuisance to the neighborhood, and it's time the law did something about it." The officer said calmly, "Ma'am, his property isn't under the jurisdiction of the HOA, and according to county records, this land is legally zoned for agriculture." Brenda smiled, but it was one of those sickly sweet, fake smiles that made my skin crawl. "Oh, I think you'll want to look a little deeper," she said, pulling out a thick stack of printed documents. The officer took them, flipping through them with a frown. I had absolutely no idea what Brenda had cooked up this time, but I could already tell she thought she had me cornered. I crossed my arms, trying to look confident despite the knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. "So, what exactly am I being accused of now, Brenda?" I asked, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Brenda grinned, a truly nasty, triumphant grin. "Oh, just a little thing called operating a commercial business without a permit." She had gone through every single farm record she could find, digging up anything she thought she could twist and use against me. She had printed out listings for my farm's produce stand, arguing that since I sold vegetables, eggs, and dairy at the farmer's market, that somehow transformed my peaceful farm into a bustling commercial enterprise that needed a different kind of zoning permit. "This is a residential area," she said sweetly, her voice dripping with false concern, "and I do believe commercial operations are strictly prohibited." One of the officers scratched his chin, looking thoughtful. "Selling at a farmer's market doesn't automatically make this commercial property, ma'am." Brenda's face twitched with annoyance. "Then how about the trucks?" she snapped, pointing dramatically towards my barn. "The farm equipment? The deliveries? I have pictures of multiple work trucks entering and leaving the property. That's business activity, isn't it?" I was getting so tired of this ridiculous nonsense. "Brenda," I said, trying to keep my voice level, "those are farm supply deliveries. This is a working farm, you know? The kind that feeds people." But Brenda wasn't listening. She was too busy watching the officers, practically vibrating with anticipation, waiting for them to say something, anything, that would validate her insane crusade. And then, just as one of the cops was about to answer, another car pulled up. Not just any car, a sleek, black government vehicle with tinted windows. Brenda frowned, her perfect suburban composure momentarily cracking. "Who's that?" I smiled for the first time that morning, a genuine, hopeful smile. "Oh, Brenda, I think you're about to find out." The door opened, and out stepped a serious-looking man in a dark suit, carrying a briefcase. He walked straight past me, offering a brief nod to the officers. "Good morning, gentlemen. I was asked to come down here for a site visit." Brenda looked utterly confused. "Who are you?" The man turned to her, his expression unreadable. "I work with the state's Agricultural Protection Bureau. We received a report that someone was interfering with a legally protected farm." Brenda's smug look vanished as if it had been wiped clean. The officer holding her stack of documents quickly handed them to the new arrival. "Sir, this is Mrs. Henderson. She's the one who made the complaint." The man in the suit nodded curtly. "Thank you. I'll take it from here." And just like that, Brenda's entire meticulously crafted plan began to crumble. She stood there, mouth slightly agape, clearly trying to process what was happening. She had expected the local police to shut down my farm, issue hefty fines, or maybe even force me to relocate my animals. Instead, she was now face to face with a state official, one who was here to investigate her. The officer from before, still holding Brenda's ridiculous stack of complaints, handed them over to the man in the suit. "Mr. Davies," he said, "she's been making a lot of claims about zoning violations, commercial misuse, and general nuisance complaints." Mr. Davies, still with that unreadable expression, took a long look at the papers. Then he turned to me. "Mr. Miller, you own this farm, correct?" I nodded. "That's right. It's been in my family for generations." "And you're operating under a legal agricultural exemption, correct?" "Correct," I confirmed. "The county and state both recognize my land as farmland, and I have all the proper documentation to prove it." Mr. Davies turned back to Brenda. "Ma'am, are you aware that this farm is protected under the state's Right to Farm Act?" Brenda blinked, looking utterly bewildered. The what?" "The Right to Farm Act," Mr. Davies repeated, his tone flat and authoritative. "It prevents local ordinances and neighborhood regulations from interfering with legally established agricultural operations. That includes noise complaints, aesthetic disputes, and yes," he emphasized, looking directly at Brenda, "attempts to reclassify farms as commercial businesses just because they conduct basic agricultural trade." Brenda's face turned a shade of red that I didn't think was humanly possible. "That's ridiculous. This is a residential community." Mr. Davies flipped through the papers before looking up at the police officers. "Can you verify that Mr. Miller's farm was established before this neighborhood was built?" One of the officers, who had clearly been briefed by the county earlier, nodded. "Yes, sir. The farm has been here for over 100 years. The neighborhood's HOA was formed much later." Mr. Davies looked back at Brenda. "Then, by state law, This farm has more legal standing here than your HOA. You could have heard a pin drop. Brenda was absolutely fuming. But that's not fair. These people didn't move here to live next to a barnyard. They want peace, cleanliness, order. Mr. Davies raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. And Mr. Miller wants to keep his legally protected farm, which existed before any of you moved in. If your HOA wanted to avoid agricultural properties, it should have done better research before expanding into farm-adjacent land. Brenda actually stomped her foot like a spoiled child. This is insane. I've had to put up with the stench, the noise, and the eyesore of this farm for years. It's time it goes. Mr. Davies sighed, pulling out his tablet. Mrs. Henderson, I'll remind you that filing false complaints against a legally protected agricultural property is considered harassment under the state's agricultural laws. Additionally, any attempt to restrict, interfere with, or disrupt its operation without just cause could result in civil penalties. Brenda scoffed. Civil penalties? Yes, Mr. Davies said calmly. That means fines, lawsuits, and possible liability for any financial damages Mr. Miller incurs due to these repeated false complaints. I had to bite my lip to keep from laughing out loud. Brenda, of course, refused to go down without one last ridiculous attempt to shift blame. This is corruption, she screamed, pointing a trembling finger at me. You paid these people off. You bribed them to protect your filthy farm. Mr. Davies, to his credit, didn't even react to her outburst. He simply sighed again and turned to the police officers. Officers, I believe we're done here. I'll be filing a formal complaint against Mrs. Henderson for repeated malicious legal actions against this farm. The Department of Agriculture will be in touch. One of the officers turned to Brenda, his expression stern. Ma'am, at this point, we're going to strongly advise that you stop interfering with this property. Continuing down this path could lead to legal consequences for you. Brenda's face twisted into something truly ugly, a mixture of rage and disbelief. You can't be serious. Very serious, Mr. Davies said firmly. And if you continue harassing Mr. Miller, we will have no choice but to escalate the matter. Brenda completely lost it then. She launched into a tirade of complaints, accusations, and increasingly wild conspiracy theories about how I was somehow tricking the government into backing me up. But no one was listening anymore. Mr. Davies, the officers, and even the neighbors who had started to gather to watch the spectacle had all checked out. Finally, one of the officers sighed. All right, ma'am, I think we're done here. We're going to have to ask you to leave the property. Brenda opened her mouth to argue, but the other officer cut her off. If you refuse, we'll have to file a formal trespassing complaint. Brenda's jaw snapped shut so hard I thought her teeth might crack. With a furious glare in my direction, she turned on her heel and stormed back toward her house. I let out a slow, shaky breath, watching her retreat. Mr. Davies turned to me, shaking his head with a wry smile. People like that never learn, huh? Never, I agreed, a wave of relief washing over me. Mr. Davies gave me a firm nod. I'll be in touch soon. If she causes you any more problems, let me know. We'll do what we can. Will do, I said. And thank you. Truly. With that, Mr. Davies and the officers left, leaving me standing in the middle of my farm, finally able to breathe easy. But as I watched Brenda stomp up her driveway, one thought crossed my mind: this might be over for now, but knowing her, she wasn't done yet. Suddenly, Brenda's entire demeanor shifted. Gone was the smugness, the air of superiority. Now, she was standing frozen in place, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. Wait, hold on. She stammered, turning back towards the officers, her voice laced with desperation. I called you here. You're supposed to be handling him, not me. Mr. Davies, the Agricultural Protection Bureau officer, remained completely unfazed. Mrs. Henderson, your complaints have been investigated, and they hold no legal merit. However, your continued interference with this farm is a separate matter, one that falls under my department's jurisdiction. Brenda's face turned an even more impressive shade of red. That's ridiculous. You work for the state. The state can just barge into a private neighborhood and start making threats. Mr. Davies sighed, pulling out a small, official-looking booklet from his briefcase. Mrs. Henderson, this is the Right to Farm Act, a legally binding document that protects established farms like Mr. Miller's from unlawful interference. He flipped to a specific page and pointed at a highlighted section. It explicitly states that any individual or entity that knowingly obstructs, disrupts, or harasses a legally recognized farm can face civil penalties, and if damages are proven, criminal charges. Brenda froze, her eyes wide with disbelief. Criminal charges? The officer who had first spoken to me nodded grimly. Ma'am, you filed multiple false reports against this property, attempted to manipulate zoning laws under fraudulent pretenses, and knowingly interfered with a protected agricultural operation. That's more than enough grounds for an official investigation. Brenda stumbled back, clutching her clipboard like it was some kind of legal shield. You can't be serious. I was only trying to maintain the integrity of the neighborhood. I was doing my duty. Mr. Davies didn't even flinch. Your duty has resulted in repeated legal complaints, misuse of emergency resources, and attempted property interference. Brenda whipped around toward the gathered neighbors, desperate for backup. You all saw this. He's ruining our community. He's making this place unlivable. We need to stand together. But instead of nodding along in agreement, the crowd stayed silent. A few homeowners glanced at each other uncomfortably. One of them, a man we'll call Arthur, finally spoke up. Brenda, you've gone too far. Brenda's face twitched with fury. Excuse me? This farm has been here long before we moved in, Arthur continued, his voice surprisingly firm. And let's be honest, you've been harassing him for years. You called the cops over everything, you demand ridiculous changes, and now you're filing fraudulent complaints. Another neighbor, a kind woman we'll call Sarah, crossed her arms. We moved here for peace and quiet, Brenda, but ever since you became HOA president, all you do is make problems where there aren't any. Brenda looked genuinely betrayed. You don't understand. I was trying to protect property values. Arthur scoffed. Brenda, my home's value has probably gone down since you started running this HOA like a dictatorship. You fine people for leaving their trash cans out 5 minutes late, you threatened to tow cars that were legally parked, and now this? Brenda whirled back toward the officers. You can't punish me for trying to keep order. But Mr. Davies wasn't done. Mrs. Henderson, we're filing an official report on your unlawful actions against this farm. The Department of Agriculture will be contacting you regarding fines and potential legal proceedings. Additionally, based on what we've heard today, there may be cause for further investigation into the HOA's operations. Brenda's eyes went wide with panic. What do you mean? One of the officers, clearly fed up, pulled out a notepad. We've received multiple complaints about your conduct as HOA president. This might go beyond farm interference. We'll be looking into how you've been running things. Brenda's entire body went rigid. Then, to make matters even worse, a third police cruiser pulled into the driveway. A younger officer stepped out, clipboard in hand, and walked over to the group. Sorry to interrupt, but we just got confirmation from the county clerk's office. They flagged some irregularities in the HOA's financial filings. We need to bring in Mrs. Henderson for questioning. Brenda choked. What? What? The senior officer sighed. Mrs. Henderson, we're going to need you to come with us. Brenda staggered back, clutching her clipboard like it was a lifeline. No. This is a mistake. You should be arresting him. She pointed wildly at me, her voice cracking with hysteria. But nobody was listening. The officer stepped forward, and Brenda screeched in fury, You can't do this. I am the HOA president. President? Not anymore, Arthur muttered under his breath, a hint of satisfaction in his voice. Brenda tried to fight it, but it was over. The officers cuffed her right there, her angry protests falling on deaf ears. The entire neighborhood watched in stunned silence as she was escorted to the police cruiser. Before they shut the door, she looked directly at me, her face twisted in pure, unadulterated rage. "You ruined everything." I smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile this time. "No, Brenda. You did that all by yourself." As the police cruisers pulled away, the neighbors slowly started clapping. Arthur turned to me, a wide grin on his face. "Guess she finally pushed too far." "Guess so," I said, shaking my head in disbelief. And here I thought I was the one in trouble. Mr. Davies chuckled. "Sometimes, Mr. Miller, people bury themselves. You just have to stand back and let them dig." Brenda was gone. The HOA was under official scrutiny. And my farm? My farm was completely safe. For the first time in years, I felt a genuine sense of peace. Valuable lesson: this story serves as a potent reminder that respect for others and their property is paramount. It highlights the dangers of unchecked power and the importance of understanding and abiding by the law. Just because someone holds a position of authority within a community doesn't give them the right to harass or infringe upon the rights of others, especially when those rights are legally protected. Sometimes, those who seek to control others end up losing control themselves. What are your thoughts on this situation? Have you ever dealt with a neighbor like Brenda? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel for more engaging content.